Hello, welcome to today's webinar, Preventing Disaster, How Banks Can Address Operational Resilience to Prepare for Global Outages. In today's webinar, which is hosted in association with CGI, we'll look at best practices for companies preparing for Europe's Digital Operational Resilience Act, otherwise known as DORA, and what banks can learn from July's CrowdStrike outage. I'll be helped by three panelists. My name's Graham Buck. I'm editor and writer and today's moderator. And I'll be speaking to Steve Wojciewicz, Senior Vice President of Consulting Delivery and leader of the US Global Technology Operations for CGI, Lorraine Mowat, Partner of Payment Services at Thistle Initiatives, and Angela Candlin-Evans, Head of Business Continuity and Operational Resilience at ClearBank. And before we kick off, I should also mention that CGI has just published a very concise white paper on the Digital Operational Resilience Act and how it will affect EU's financial sector, and that can be downloaded from the CGI website. So to kick off with the Digital Operational Resilience Act, or DORA, we're fast approaching the 17th of January 2025 deadline for DORA compliance. So perhaps to start off with, I'd like to ask each of you where the European market is right now when it comes to preparing for DORA and strengthening operational resilience. So perhaps you'd like to kick off, Steve, with that question.
Certainly. Thank you, Graham. I believe operationally, organizations are ready operationally. The question will be the reporting of proving your operational resilience and compliance with the various attributes and pillars of DORA around risk management, around incident reporting, and operational resilience with third parties and information sharing along those lines as well. So I think organizations have a lot of the operational capabilities and things that they need to comply with DORA. I think just like every other regulatory requirement, being able to report that you satisfactorily comply with the expectation of the requirement will take a little bit of time. Like you said, it was announced in 2020, right? And back 5 years ago, and everyone said, okay, it's interesting. We got 5 years to work on it, and now it's right on our doorstep, less than 3 months away. And so organizations, I think, are clamoring a bit about the specifics of what are we going to have to report. There are things in the regulation like, report a serious incident in 4 hours. Well, there's debate about what constitutes serious, right? And what constitutes the 24-hour detection guidelines along those things as well. So organizations have been working on resiliency in a broader context for a very, very long time. Putting regulations around it and the reporting of compliance with a regulation. To me, I think organizations will be ready. It's understanding what are the nuances of the sharpen the pencil on the reporting attributes of complying with the regulation itself.
Great. I'd like to ask the question to Lorraine and Angela, but perhaps before I do so, we do have an audience poll, and I thought perhaps we'll launch this fairly early on. Question being, for our audience members, are you ready to comply with the DORA requirements on January the 17th, 2025? And 4 potential responses: A, yes, we're ready; B, we're mostly ready; C, it's unlikely that we will be ready; and D, no way will we be ready. So if you'd like to tick one of those responses, and hopefully we'll have the feedback a little later on. But if I could pose the same question on DORA to you, Lorraine.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So I think it really depends. I think there's from experience, I think you'll find that firms are in various stages of preparation for DORA. And I think that those levels of readiness are likely to vary quite widely. I think perhaps larger, more established firms, and particularly, coming from a regulatory compliance background, those that are maybe being subject to more rigorous regulatory requirements already, or maybe they've already in some state of readiness, perhaps from a UK perspective, maybe more advanced in their preparations. And I think I see that there's firms who have generally developed frameworks, particularly around cybersecurity, business continuity, and importantly, that sort of third-party risk. And I think all of those, of course, align pretty closely with the DORA's requirements. However, quite often what you see is the smaller firms, and I work with a lot of fintech companies, and I think they tend to find it a little bit more challenging to meet the actual standards. I think there's a lot of requirements for particularly for rigorous scenario testing, continuous monitoring, the enhanced reporting that's been mentioned there. And that's going to create resource and expertise demands that maybe some firms either don't have or they haven't already fully accounted for. So that could be a bit of an issue and a bit of a blocker to implementation. Perhaps additionally, perhaps where the Act mandates extensive oversight of third parties, particularly ICT service providers, that can be quite challenging given the interconnected nature of many firms' digital services and reliance on vendors, and firms that depend heavily on external tech solutions might need to significantly increase their oversight capabilities. So I think there's good stories and maybe not so good stories depending on what type or shape of firm you're actually talking to.
Yeah. Thank you, Lorraine. And could I have your thoughts, Angela?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Clearbank are a UK regulated business, and we've been on the operational resilience journey for some time, but we've recently gained a European banking license. So the need to jump on the DORA bus has also been something that we needed to look at quite quickly as well. And I think that because we've all been gearing up ready for operational resilience in the UK, it's also meant that with DORA coming around about the same time, we've been able to kind of work on both initiatives concurrently and really establish quite strong resilience across the organisation. So I think the two being kind of interlinked, which is great that there's that kind of international interest in improving resilience overall, is really helpful. In terms of readiness, obviously we're a fintech organisation and we are all over it. We've wanted to make sure that we are well prepared and ready for everything to go live, and we've got some great stuff that's in place. As a UK bank, I'm part of the Payments Industry Resilience Forum in the UK, which is really helpful in terms of sharing best practice and kind of talking about getting ready for some of these initiatives that need to be rolled out, ready for the regulatory deadline. So, the collaboration that's out there, I think, is really helpful, and means that people aren't just necessarily on their own wanting to establish the practices that need to be put in place. And I think, there's quite a number of risks out there for us at the moment, and more organisations are reliant on third parties, as you mentioned, and try to focus on some of those common threats that we have, like cyber disruption and geopolitical elements. But I mean, there's quite a number of key practices, I think, that people are trying to achieve at the moment to support infrastructure. Things like embedding sort of vigorous vendor risk assessments and comprehensive due diligence and things like that. I think that's kind of good practice and is enabling a lot of us to prepare to be ready for both of those regulations.
Excellent. Thank you. Come on next to the CrowdStrike outage, which was 3 months ago, but I think the repercussions of that are just coming through. In fact, just in the last few days, there have been news reports about Delta Airlines launching a claim for $500 million in lost revenue. just to run through the circumstances, the CrowdStrike outage was caused by a faulty update in July and didn't just hit the financial sector, but all industries. Investigations suggested the outage was caused by a failed content configuration update for a key piece of cloud-based Windows software called the Falcon Sensor, which in turn disabled systems on an estimated 8.5 million computers running Windows. CrowdStrike was able to implement a solution to the issue within 80 minutes, but nonetheless, the impacts on business affected globally lasted much longer and triggered a variety of complex problems. And insurance company Parametric estimated that in the US, the outage cost Fortune 500 companies a total of $5.4 billion. And Steve, what are the lessons of organizations? What can organizations learn about resilience from the CrowdStrike outage?
Yeah, look, we're going to rely on third-party partners all the time. They're becoming, increasingly critical on our day-to-day operations. And, I'll say the good news and the bad news. The bad news was, CrowdStrike had an incident. The good news was it was an operational one, not a security one, right? Where, the update was a content update, not a real security breach type of an update. So from an operational point of view, if we can take a step back and learn from it, I don't see organizations becoming less and less, dependent on third-party providers. And therefore, we must embrace these partners and providers as if they were our own. So take CrowdStrike, for an example. As part of talking with the partners and compliance with SLAs or XLAs and ability to respond and react and those type of things, as part of your discussions with those partners, you got to have those kind of deep level discussions as if it was your own team delivering to your constituents in your company. And so the CrowdStrike instance brought to light, something that many organizations just didn't take into consideration. CrowdStrike provides content updates, right? And it just goes out, right? And it just so happens there was a quality escape, actually 3 of them in CrowdStrike, where the operational, it became a problem. And as a consumer of the service, we didn't have the ability to test it before it was implemented, right? And that, to us, brought to light the need to say, okay, you're providing a SaaS service, a security service for us, and you push these updates out, on a regular basis. But we took a step back and said, we have no ability to test whether or not it has any impact on us at all. Up until that point, it had 0. So having the discussions with your partners, your third-party providers, your SaaS providers, your third-party facilitators and things along those lines, you've got to have the discussion about, I just don't want you to just drop updates into my infrastructure whenever you feel like it and assume it's all going to be good, because it's been proven that there were 3 quality gate escapes, within CrowdStrike, and I, as a user of it, wasn't able to implement a 4th or a 5th. And so we're doing that now, right? Just to allow me to sleep at night that says, okay, a partner like CrowdStrike pushed an update. I'll receive the update. I'll test it for a while in some, sandbox or some test environment, or, I'll let the market test it for a little while, 6, 8, 10 hours, because the reality is if I didn't accept it right off the bat, I could have waited 20 minutes, and then realized, oh, goodness gracious, there's a problem. Don't accept it. Good. CrowdStrike is going to go fix it. They published an update. I'll wait another 20 minutes. Oh, that update seems to work. I'll take it, kind of a thing. So as it relates to the operational discipline, when you have these, when you are reliant on these third-party providers, you got to be able to just implement operational discipline and quality and acceptance and change management and all these type of things that we as an organization do on a day-to-day basis, and make sure that they're in compliance with what we expect from our internal teams, because they are part of our infrastructure now and expect it on them as well as a third-party provider.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Angela, what are your thoughts on the lessons of CrowdStrike?
For me, we need to, as companies, put a bit more focus on change management. I think a number of incidents out there are as a result of making changes, including the CrowdStrike incident, and we need to look at how we make change safe. However, on top of it, we think we are, that things will still occur. And I think that's the point around this, that we need to all consider how to make change safely. I mean, look, if somebody like CrowdStrike can have an incident like that, it just proves to the rest of us that, anything is ultimately possible. So it adds things like that, add weight to what we do for a living in terms of making resilience more important, which is not something we want, but it does help us. But I think for that, which had such a global impact and which was so well broadcast, it was all over the news, everybody kind of knew what was going on. It just shows that the more reliance we have on kind of like digital and cyber type systems and activities, it just shows that we have to be way more resilient and really kind of pay a lot of attention to what goes on. So that for me in particular, change management is key. No matter how safe we think it is, we need to pay attention.
Before I come on to you, Lorraine, this might be a good opportunity to launch our second audience poll and see how our audience members were affected. So, second poll. How big an impact did the July 2024 CrowdStrike outage have on your organization? A, it was highly disruptive and costly. B, it was disruptive, but the impact was relatively short-lived. C, the disruption and cost to us was relatively minor. Or D, we escaped any impact. So I'd be interested to see what the results are to that poll. So anyway, if I can come on to you now, Lorraine, your thoughts on the outage.
My thoughts on the outage, my thoughts about operational resilience in general is expect the unexpected. I think that's the message here. Like, they are maybe unlikely but plausible events. That's how they're described. And I think that we've just, despite that message being out there, people are just not prepared. They're not prepared and ready, and they have no contingency. And one thing I just want to say before I give my actual response to your question is to remember that operational resilience is not business continuity planning. Operational resilience is a forward-looking thing. It's what's my contingency going to be, not oops, it's happened, and now I need to pick up the pieces and try and get it all in order. So I think it's been mentioned a couple of times here already, but I think what that incident emphasised was the risk of vendor dependency, basically, and the fact that, and I know this from my own experience of guiding firms through regulation and different type of initiatives like this, that very often that there is just not enough emphasis put on the evaluation of those critical third parties, to which, obviously on whom we all depend as businesses, and also considering appropriate risk management strategies to mitigate any potential downtime or disruption, whether that's backup solutions and planning for those potential points of failure in third-party software. And that's really also needs to include, I don't think people do enough business impact analysis when they're onboarding a new third party, identifying those critical operations and also the consequences of the disruption, which operational resilience in the UK and DORA, of course, is looking to address, to make sure people are thinking about those kind of things to help highlight those single points of failure, and sort of interruptions from whether it's bad players or whether it's purely accidental. But most importantly, I think, what we need to learn here is it kind of underscores the value of well-documented response playbooks or plans that include steps for containment, recovery, and importantly, communication, those, whether they're tabletop exercises or whatever they are, that kind of simulate the disruptive event, that can just make sure that you're going to be prepared. So being prepared, expect the unexpected, and then I think you'll be ready. So those kind of exercises really need to be covering various scenarios, including some less common situations such as vendor-driven outages, just to make sure that you're ready. So I think what it's taught us all really is that we need to be prepared to expect the unexpected. I think it can happen and will happen, and will probably happen in the future, sadly.
We have the feedback from the first poll, and the reassuring news is 4 out of 5 of our audience are fairly confident on preparations for DORA. So the question was, are you ready to comply with the DORA requirements on January the 17th next year? Yes, we're ready. 18.2% said they were ready. And 63.6%, almost 2 out of 3, said that they were mostly ready, which we probably expect actually, with the implementation date still just under 3 months away. 13.6% said it's unlikely that they would be ready, and 4.5% were highly pessimistic. No way will we be ready.
This kind of so being likely 3 months away. This is similar to what I would expect. A 60-40 type of a bell curve, right? You've got roughly 20%. We're ready. 20%. Probably not going to be ready, and then the majority of them saying, "Yep, we're mostly ready." And then we'll know for sure come January the 17th, right?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, if I could just add as well, and I've seen this happen so many times before with other regulatory initiatives, feeling mostly ready might sound good, and it's a big percentage that are claiming that. But what does mostly ready mean? And unfortunately, sometimes what that means is that people are running to the finish line lastminute.com, and then that's when things can get forgotten or things are not quite put in place the way they ought to be. So I don't know whether I'd take too much comfort from being mostly ready, but I think it just raises some questions in my head about perhaps what are the remaining gaps in readiness levels, therefore, so you can, I guess, reflect that solid progress. But yeah, it's interesting.
And are the results in line with what you were expecting, Angela?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the vast majority there are mostly ready, aren't they? And there are just kind of a remaining few that are likely not to be ready. But when you mention to management that there's a regulation about to be implemented and has to be signed off by a certain date, I'm sure the attention and focus will go into that last minute and hopefully make sure those guys are ready for the deadline.
Yeah, I think Lorraine. I think one of the things that Lorraine said. I think the closer we get to January 17th, I suspect the smaller that mostly ready will come down, and the likely not ready will go up.
Good point.
Yeah, you think you've covered everything, but last minute there can be the odds like, oh, we've not covered that quick. Let's try and do it. Yeah. So yeah, I think you're probably right.
Moving on to the third issue, and we've touched on it already. Economies of scale mean that our industry is increasingly reliant on external partnerships, which has created a nesting doll ecosystem where each bank has a main supplier who also has an ecosystem of suppliers who each have an ecosystem of their own as well. From cybersecurity to leakage to uptime and everything else, institutions need to ensure their resilient tech stack is first class. But how do they do that? To start with you, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, similar to what we do if you were doing it internally, right? The discipline of making sure that whatever tech stack you or service you're looking to stand up in your organization, the requirements and the discipline to onboard those things should be no different whether you're doing it in-house or getting it from a provider, right? They should go through all of the same due diligence on, does it meet our requirements around quality and efficiency and uptime and SLAs, and does it meet our requirements as it relates to user experience and integration with the rest of our infrastructure. it just so happens that it's, not built and provided by us, the user of the service. But the discipline to implement it shouldn't change at all, right? Our resilience on the infrastructure is the same. Our end clients and our end users and our constituents out there expect us to deliver infrastructure and solutions and applications and things irrelevant of what the technology stack is and who we're looking at, whether we build it internally, whether we get it from an external provider, whether it's a SaaS, whether it's a software we buy and include it internally and things along those lines. Quality, efficiency, SLAs, all these type of things, we're responsible for. And so as we are responsible, we must make sure that those providers understand our level of responsibility and our commitment to our end clients and users, and they must be able to sign up for the things that we are signing up for to our end clients. And if they're not willing to do that, I'm looking for a different provider, right? If they're saying, I can't meet 5 nines availability. If I'm saying, my responsiveness with SLA won't meet what you need, or, my DR or you can't, I won't do it, or, I can't comply with your change management process or things like that, then they fundamentally don't understand my business or my needs. And therefore I'll go find a different provider. And if I can't find another provider, I'll figure out how to do it myself, right? But at the end of the day, I am responsible to deliver some type of value and outcome to my end clients and my constituencies. And then all of the parts of my ecosystem, internal and external, must understand what I am obligated to do to my clients, and they must understand that they are obligated to me to be able to provide those same obligations to my end clients.
Yeah. Your thoughts, Lorraine?
I completely agree with everything Steve just said there, particularly around like SLAs, etc. One thing, again, just from experience, I think firms where they're kind of, I get the advantages of the economies of scale, with that, but also that what your downside is, I guess, a layered reliance on third-party suppliers. And when having helped firms implement operational resilience, they tend to kind of forget about those layers, so they can be easily forgotten. But I think, to sort of, I guess, to build up or to fortify the tech stack, I guess, in such an arrangement is going to need the clear SLAs, which Steve's mentioned there, but not just with the primary suppliers, but also those secondary suppliers or beyond, if that's the case. And they've really got to have detailed performance expectations, reliance requirements, communication protocols, in case of disruption, and just make sure that the contracts also include all of that. But most importantly, I think, would be, the need to the continuous monitoring piece. So the monitoring of those critical systems and early detection, therefore, of issues is really key. Making sure, where possible, you've maybe got real-time visibility across each layer of the tech stack, including those with third-party vendors, of course, just allowing you to sort of quickly detect and then, of course, then manage, mitigate whatever any emerging vulnerabilities. Being aware, of course, firsthand what potential vulnerabilities it could look like, and like before, I've said before, due diligence, risk assessment is really important. If you're onboarding or you're renewing contract with any third-party suppliers, you've got to understand the flow there, and you've got to make sure that your risk assessments and your due diligence incorporates that as well. And that's not just at onboarding, that's, I think, through your relationship with them. So I think there's a lot of what I would say is common sense, really, steps that I would suggest you take. And of course, there's a bit of critical supply where you're relying on maybe a single third-party supplier, and you're concentrating your services with one of supplier that's got multiple sub-suppliers. Then you've got to also think about the additional risk that introduces, and whether it be worthwhile sort of diversifying to avoid that risk.
Excellent. And any additional thoughts, Angela?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's all about strong relationship management and communication. So, yeah, obviously you have to do your comprehensive due diligence and your risk assessments and things like that, and making sure there are clearly defined SLAs. But the better your relationship is, and those collaborative relationships with your vendors helps promote your sort of shared resilience goals, really. And when you carry out testing with them, it means that should be much more seamless and open in terms of discussing any actions or vulnerabilities that arise. So you've got that really clear picture of what's going on. I think that's really, really important for me. Regular testing as well, the regular interaction. That's just so important, because if you make a success of your testing, then you're kind of more confident. Whereas if you know things are going to slightly go wrong, you have to be aware when you're writing your plans and recovery plans that, do I need to consider having an alternative supplier for this? Is that something we need to have on a hot or warm basis, ready and raring to go? Or do I trust that we can ensure that this supplier can keep us within our impact tolerances? If you talk about operational resilience, we need to make sure that they're on the same line as us and that they can recover in those set times. So I think the better your relationship with them, the better the overall process is going to work for me.
Thank you. Had some feedback from our second audience poll. How big an impact did the CrowdStrike outage have on your organisation? And just over 5.3% said it was highly disruptive and costly. And another 7.9% it was disruptive, but the impact was relatively short-lived. Fortunately, the majority had little or no effect. 44.7% said the disruption and cost to us was relatively minor, and 42.1% said we escaped any impact. Again, that's pretty much what you would have expected.
I frankly, I expected the distribution to be a bit different, but what I think this tells me is one of a few things. Either, the folks that are responding to the poll don't use CrowdStrike, right? So obviously, we escaped any impact because we don't use it. Number two, they're either not a 24/7 shop because it happened, very late in the US, very early in Europe, right? Which their systems may have been turned off and we're not impacted by the update, which is obviously another possibility. The other thing that is interesting here is that if if it was disruptive but relatively short-lived or was relatively minor, it may assert to me that number one, they have CrowdStrike, number two, they were impacted, but I'd be curious to hear about their security attributes on these systems and how the user IDs and things along those lines have administrative access, which is a very weak security posture because you had to have admin access in order to remediate every single system. And for me personally, for our organization personally, we do not allow admin access, right, to prevent, flyby phishing or downloading malicious content or things along those lines, or installing applications with malware or things. And we have to, we have to grant admin access in order to do those type of things with a management level. So, I mean, maybe another question we should have had on here too is how many actually have CrowdStrike and how many were actually impacted. That may have changed the skew of the distribution a little bit, but to me, I was surprised that 88% had relatively minor or no impact. That to me surprises me.
Lorraine,
also surprised, and I guess what we don't know is that figure low because they had the firms impacted had strong instant response plans or backup systems that they were able to mitigate it well, or did they have enough service redundancies built in, so maybe they were using multiple providers at the same time, if they'd multi-layered sort of solutions in place, or maybe the services might not be so critical for them, and they were therefore less impacted by it. I think there's a few additional questions that we would need to ask to totally understand the number and to logically assess whether that's a good thing or not a good thing. But yeah, it's an interesting number. But I think just not able to put my finger on whether in fact it was because the others weren't so badly impacted because they dealt with it well, or there's something else at play. It's hard to say.
Yeah, the other thing that's obvious here is that we don't have Delta as part of the webinar watching, because that highly costly and disruptive would probably be very, very high.
Yeah.
Anything you'd like to add, Angela?
I don't think to be honest, it's in line with where I expected. We were not really affected that much, so yeah, I'm not too surprised, but I can understand why the other guys are.
I've had a comment from one of our audience, which I'll read to you. There is concern that information provided by the organisation to customers on third-party vendors, how can we make sure information does not fall into the wrong hands?
So what any specifics around what kind of information? Is it around operational metrics and SLAs and things along those lines, or don't we know?
Presumably, yes. Yeah, that's the question that's appeared on the screen.
So I think if we're just talking about, if we're talking about data management, we're talking about data protection, I'm going to assume with this particular question. So if I go with, if it's okay, I can run with that by way of a response. But data protection regulation, GDPR, and in the UK GDPR, which is the same thing, more or less. I mean, it still applies. So irrespective of what one piece of regulatory or what one regulatory requirement, what you're obligated to do under one regulatory requirement doesn't take away everything you need to do under another. So whatever you're doing by way of data, irrespective of what operational resilience is requiring you to do, must still be done under the guise of the GDPR requirements. So you still have to have the same level of protection and security to protect the integrity and the safety of any personal data that you're processing for the purposes of complying with any type of regulatory initiative, no matter what it is. So I don't know if that answers the question. The question's a wee bit vague, so I'm not quite sure if that's what we're looking for.
Yeah. Okay. A fairly lengthy question here. It has to be acknowledged that certain scenarios can be mitigated and others will not. If a day zero exploit is leveraged on Edge browser, which in turn infects users with dormant malware, which is subsequently activated on a given day, brackets, the Stuxnet incident is a classic example, with the recent Transport for London hack evidencing that the threat is live and real. Reality is the financial services industry can recover, but all will depend on the resources available at hand to the financial institution or credit institution, and that is where size and complexity matters. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it comes back to some of the comments that Lorraine said earlier, right, around trying to be as proactive as possible. So to the extent that you're doing good scanning and remediation of vulnerabilities, not allowing any high or critical CVEs to remain in your environment for any length of time at all will reduce mitigation of that. There are operational and technical things you can do to prevent, lateral movement and kicking off of malware that's maybe been dormant for a very long time. Keeping updated with all of the software stacks with the latest and greatest, updates for those things will help mitigate those type of things. But if you don't have the operational discipline, the risk just goes up, right? And so, to the extent that you keep your software updated, you keep operational focus and resilience on getting rid of known vulnerabilities whether it's with patches or hardening or strong passwords or not susceptible to phishing attacks or, things along these lines. The vast majority of attacks these days still come through the old, the tried and true phishing and, using exploits that have been out there for years and things along those lines. So, it takes way too much time and effort for a hacker to try and exploit something that's new, because it takes a lot of work. There is way too much shared information out there by the bad people on how to exploit things that have been out there for a really long time, and hackers are lazy, and so they just want to take the easiest way out. And the only way I know how to do that is to educate the people, make sure the processes are in place, make sure your ability to respond to an exploit or a compromise or ransomware or something, to fall back on something that is not infected. All of these things are really important in order to mitigate any kind of these things. And by the way, all these things I just mentioned has, obviously is relevant to the financial industry, but it's for every industry, right? It's just good operational hygiene and discipline.
Yeah.
I can also, I think as well, particularly for maybe larger financial services firms, and I think a few banks have probably had this issue where they often have legacy systems and probably more intricate. I mean, I'm not a technical person, incidentally, IT technical person anyway. So, maybe some more intricate networks. And I think sometimes that can complicate things. And I think there's therefore a challenge to try and integrate new resilience measures into old systems. And of course that can be problematic. It can be resource intensive, and of course it can be costly. But I think firms just need to try and find a way to tailor their systems to try and manage that as best they can. For smaller firms, quite often we get simpler tech stacks, and so it's can be a little bit easier to try and mitigate the risks. But for bigger organizations with these legacy systems, it can be more complex.
Anything before we move on to the next subject? Anything you'd like to add, Angela?
I think, AI potentially has a role to play in this as well, which I know we're going to talk about shortly, so I won't go into that too much, but there's a role for that to play in terms of enhancing the resilience. But it's an interesting topic, and I know we're going to come on to that, so I'll go back to you, Graham.
Before we do, I have a sort of DORA-related question for each of you. Starting with you, Steve. Europe has been proactive in developing and launching DORA. Is the US likely to follow with a similar initiative? And if so, how soon might it be launched?
Yeah, I mean, I suspect we will have something similar, simply because, it'll be required, right? The politicians and the regulatory requirements are going to get pressure from industry, and we live in a connected worldwide environment, and if there is requirements in Europe, it'll flow through to the UK and then to the US, North America, those type of things, and we'll likely make a few changes just because we can't be consistent, I would say, but I do believe it'll happen. How soon, I don't know, but in the US, when we see regulations being adopted by anywhere else in the world, it typically becomes a worldwide thing over time, and organizations like ours will start to comply. I mean, we're a worldwide company, so we're going to have to apply with DORA anyway, and then as it relates to the best practices and the ability to do things, we'll take lessons learned and things that we're doing internally to comply with DORA. We'll start to move it to North America and other places as well, start to implement it, because it provides a sharper pencil on the visibility of our risk management and our incident reporting, and being able to protect, detect, contain, all the things that DORA says, and our ability to report on it. And even if a regulatory compliance from our government doesn't require it, large organizations like ours, at the corporate level, at the board level, it'll be a business requirement, right? If we're doing it there, then why don't we report on it all around the world and have a level of commonality as it relates to our operational resilience around the world. So yeah, I think the US will do it. When, I don't know. But any company that has any footprint, broader than the US is probably already looking at it to be able to be in level of compliance when the regulatory agencies in the US do get to some level of mandate.
Yeah. Angela, you already mentioned that alongside DORA, the UK has its own operational resilience initiative. Is that going to dovetail nicely with DORA? Are there any differences, or are they pretty much the same?
Yeah, I mean, for us, you're speaking my language with operational resilience. That's something, in the UK, we are always held close to our hearts, really. And I think they've really kind of had a lot of positive impacts. And I think that, along with DORA, there's that lovely dovetail that you mentioned before. I think that firms have identified what their important business services are and pinpointed where resilience efforts needs to be is kind of like a huge win for not just companies, but people that work with third parties and customers ultimately. And it's great for protecting the market. I think it's also helped us kind of better understand dependencies. So whether that is internationally or, at home, we've got that strong collaboration culture that I talked about before. And I think it can only improve supply chain resilience in the UK and globally, especially when there is such a large reliance, as I mentioned before, on, digital and cloud services nowadays. And I think the oversight from regulators, both in the UK and the EU, and the interaction then with board level members is driving that cultural shift of think resilience. And I think, I know the UK regulators are expected to provide some further guidance and potentially introducing additional resilience standards for us, especially in response to those emerging risks like the geopolitical instability, cyber threats, things like the CrowdStrike. So that continuous kind of engagement is going to help us refine how we take resilience forward internationally and how we're going to be able to adapt to emerging risks, I'd say.
Yeah. And Lorraine, DORA is obviously a very commendable European initiative to strengthen operational resilience, but I suppose the ideal would be a joined up worldwide strategy reflecting a global response rather than a regional one. Obviously, there's quite a few obstacles to that. Is that something that could be devised over time, or is it a pipe dream?
I think that would be the ideal world, wouldn't it? Where we've got one global approach. I'm not sure how realistic that is, though, and just how that would work in practice. I think it would make proper sense, and I think there's many areas of regulation where a global approach would be ideal. When we mentioned data there just a second ago, and wouldn't it be great with one big global approach to how we manage data? And we have several ways in which that's working. So I don't see it in the near future, to be honest. I think there's too many players. I think there's too many sort of jurisdictional nuances, cultural nuances, and other things that would perhaps get in the way. So
just wondered if the deteriorating geopolitical situation that also.
I mean, that for a start, exactly. I think Angela mentioned it there. I mean, the fact that we've got that at play as well. I just think the world's a little bit fragile at the moment, and I don't know that it's the time and the place for that to have its moment. So I honestly can't see it in the near future, but of course it would be an ideal place for us to be. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. With time's passing, so I'd like to get on to the topic of artificial intelligence. Angela, if you could kick off, how much of a double-edged sword is the development of AI in helping firms to become more resilient? Will the benefits be undermined by bad actors using AI to develop more sophisticated malicious attacks?
Yeah, so I think AI has a role to play in enhancing operational resilience, and I think it can give us that improved for fraud and threat detection and response by analysing a lot of data quickly. It allows us to respond to cyber threats faster than manual methods. It has predictive capabilities for allowing us to anticipate and respond to potential disruption. And the predictive maintenance can help us identify system vulnerabilities before a failure has even occurred. But there is always the risk that bad actors or bad people, as Steve referred to them before, will take advantage of the technology to create the realistic phishing campaigns, malware that adapt to and even evades the sophisticated detection mechanisms, which I think kind of links to the question we were asked before, and exploitation of other vulnerabilities. So it's definitely a double-edged sword. There's always going to be two sides to that. I think to make sure that the benefits aren't undermined, we have to take a balanced view by having the robust AI security in place, testing different eventualities, checking algorithms, and actually using AI to detect the AI-driven threats. We have to stay ahead of the regulatory standards for this, and having this sort of cross-departmental AI governance to establish some guidelines on what we should and shouldn't be doing, and what's ethical and what's secure use of AI technology looks like. That's the risk when there's the two elements, and it's so, yeah, a two-edged sword is definitely the ideal way to looking at it. But I think we have to harness the benefits while keeping those bad actors and sort of bad people at bay, really.
What are your thoughts, Lorraine?
Totally agree with what's just been said there completely. I think AI is going to offer significant benefits, definitely, for operational resilience, but it is most definitely a double-edged sword. I think that it presents several challenges and risks. Over-reliance on automation. I think AI systems, where they're making that critical decision making, I think it can sort of encounter unforeseen situations, produce erroneous outputs, so got to be careful there. I think also there's a risk of perhaps data quality and bias. The AI systems tend to rely heavily on the quality of data that they're trained on. So poor quality, bias or incomplete data then is going to lead to bad analysis, basically. And I think the cybersecurity risk thing, it can introduce new vulnerabilities as well. So whilst it's seeking to prevent them, it actually can introduce new ones, not to mention sort of it can complicate any existing structures and from an implementation perspective as well. So I think it needs to be thought about carefully, and particularly thinking about it from an ethical perspective as well, where you look at AI in decision making, which again, if we look at GDPR, and this is where that comes into play, where that automated decision making process, there's clear rules and requirements around that. So I think we need to think carefully about its use and its benefits versus the downside.
Anything you'd like to add, Steve?
Yeah, look, I double click and agree on it with both of the ladies on here. And Angela, you're right. We have to use responsible use of AI to combat the irresponsible use of AI from the bad actors, right? And make sure that we can use the models, the LLMs, to then do applied AI, right? Generative AI to use applied AI to implement in our operations. And Lorraine is exactly right? The data has to be good, because you don't want to train your models on bad data, because your model will come out all messed up, and then you're going to implement AI and mess everything up. So with any technology, the bad actor is going to try and figure out a way to leverage it and use it to their advantage. And as operations people, we must learn to use the technology and improve our operations and our resilience and our availability and quality and things along those lines, and continue to fight off the bad guys. And so we've got to make sure that how we use it, where we use it, the data that feeds it and learns from it, and our ability to apply things to it The other thing that I think could be really interesting here is that, as part of DORA, one of the 5 pillars that they talk about is this notion of information sharing. And to the extent that, across the EU and UK, across the world, this might be an opportunity for the operational and technology teams in the world to start sharing information. We haven't been able to do it in the past. I don't know why AI would have anything different, but to the extent that we can leverage each other's information and large language models and be able to fight off the bad actors using AI with lessons learned that we can then implement using our applied AI internally, provides a huge opportunity for us as a community, but as a technology base and sharing of these things. So, open MISPs and, things along these lines that could be very, very useful if we could all figure out how to get agreement and sign the NDAs and make sure there's no PII and, all the things that will probably get in the way of doing it. But there's a huge opportunity here, and the bad actors know we probably can't get out of our own way, and we're going to do our own LLMs, and we're going to do our own things, and they're just going to continue to push, and they'll push their LLMs out on the dark web, and everybody will use it, and they'll implement deeper and deeper and broader scopes of AI, and they'll start to sell these things, and so they've got a unique advantage that they don't have any geopolitical cares in the world. They don't have any country boundaries. They don't have any all they want to do is say, hey, I found this thing, and all I want to do is get attribution that I did this thing and put it out there, and and try and get create a cult following for myself because I'm a smart black ops type provider. But you have to use AI because we know the bad guys are going to use AI too. We just got to make sure we do it in such a way that doesn't disrupt our resilience, but also provides the next level of protection and security as well.
We'll have to keep responses fairly brief, but an interesting audience question just come in, which I'll read to you. What is the panel's view on who bears the cost of DORA compliance in the case of critical ICT suppliers who are asked as a consequence to undertake additional reporting and submit to audit? Many institutions seem to be taking the view that the suppliers must meet DORA requirements. It is a business expense to be met by the supplier and not chargeable to the customer. Your thoughts are on that, Lorraine?
Yeah.
I saw you grimace.
Yeah, I grimaced a little bit. Yeah, because I've heard it before. It's a question that I've been asked. So determining who should bear the costs associated with DORA, I think it's a complex issue. I think it's got to involve multiple stakeholders, including the actual institution itself, the ICT providers. But I mean, you could argue it should be the actual firm itself. So in my case, let's say the financial institution should bear the primary responsibility. But I think the ICT suppliers ought to bear some of the costs as well, particularly when it comes to enhancing their own operational resilience measures, or maybe they can share responsibility, have a bit of a balanced view around it. I think it probably needs a bit of a cost benefit analysis all round, but it is a bit of a tricky one. And I've been asked that question, and I don't have an absolute right answer, but yeah, it depends.
I think there's some benefits, isn't there, to both really, because it makes you more saleable as a supplier if you kind of put the legwork in and complied with DORA and you know what you're doing, and that makes it saleable in the same way things like international standards do. But it is a difficult one. I think it is a bit of both, and I do believe in order to be a very good supplier, you're going to have to, talk about how you can comply with DORA as part of your value attribution to whoever your consumer is.
Yeah.
Right. I think we'll have to cut that off because we're running out of time. Any concluding message from each of you that you'd like our audience to take away with them today? Starting with you, Steve.
Yeah, look, it's another, DORA is another regulatory requirements and reporting things. It's not the first, it's not going to be the last. As long as we continue to look forward and try and be as proactive as possible with our ability to be resilient, it's a matter of then understanding exactly what's it going to take to comply with the regulation. And quite frankly, it's all in our best interest to just continue to improve our game, continue to improve our operational discipline as it relates to quality, resilience, operations, et cetera. We just got to continue to keep pushing forward, continue to do better tomorrow than we do today, and understand what it takes to be able to comply with this regulation and regulations to come.
Right. Lorraine?
Yep, just echo what Steve said there. I think, look, by embedding operational resilience in your operational strategy, you're going to stay ahead of the regulatory pressure, you're going to stay ahead of the curve, you're going to be prepared for any threats, and you're basically going to safeguard your firm, your services, and I guess the sort of wider ecosystem. So I think there's a great business case for doing this for sure.
Angela?
Yeah, I echo what the other guys have said. This kind of regulatory compliance for resilience is still fairly new. We're all kind of feeling our way at the moment. There's not masses of resources available, and particularly for DORA and operational resilience, we kind of need to work out what best practice is. But I think, the fact that we're all thinking resilience a lot more is a good thing. So, it's been enjoyable.
Perfect. I think we'll wind up there. Thank you, each of you, for your thoughts and comments. It's been a very stimulating session. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.